Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju and Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy. This story kind of got glossed over in all the headlines of the week, but Carmelo Anthony is back in the NBA. He signed himself a contract with the Portland Trailblazers this week. We talked about Carmelo and like his chances, what he can really bring to a team at this point. I remember just like that interview he gave with ESPN just a few months ago where he was just like kind of giving them a why don't they want me, like a Will Smith, like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Why doesn't he want me? That's kind of like how it felt like after he got booted from the Rockets unceremoniously. And hell, Team USA didn't even want him, and they obviously were a big letdown themselves. But the big question is, what does Carmelo Anthony bring to a team at this point?
Money. I really think that's it. I think it's a cash grab for the Blazers because right now their team has sort of been a mess, and they had high hopes coming off of last season, right? They made it to the Western Conference Finals, and then Golden State, we've seen what's happened to them, sort of all got hurt. Unfortunately, I hope they all heal up very well and they come back next year just as tough as ever, as I'm sure they will. But I would think that Portland and the Blazers probably felt like, oh, this might be our year to, possibly hop on top, even though we know that the Clippers got stronger. We know that the Lakers got stronger, right? We know a lot of teams got stronger. But then, the Blazers have been very underwhelming, and underperforming. And it's just sort of sad for that fan base to go from such a good performance last year and almost a surprise performance to where you're at this year. And, you're not even one of the top 10 teams, I don't think, in the West. And so I think for them, it's like, hey, let's at least sign Melo. Worst comes to worst, we can't get any worse than what we're at right now. And then best case scenario, he brings in some jersey sales.
So are you just completely writing this Portland Trailblazers team off already?
So I'm not going to write them completely off, but I did hear an interesting stat. So I listened to Locked on Lakers, right, with Pete Zayas, Anthony Irwin. Technically, it's Anthony Irwin's show. But I heard an interesting stat in that if you're not in the top 8 in the first 10 games of your conference, you have only a 20% chance or something like that. Is either only a 20% or a 10% chance of making it to the playoffs at the end of the season. So you basically 80% of the time, you already know what the playoff picture is going to look like just based off the first 10 games of the season, which I found to be really interesting. I'd have to look more to see if that's a true statistic and exactly who developed that statistic, how they came up with it. But I think it's a really interesting statistic. And right now, the Blazers would be out of the playoffs.
I think, though, they are just a more talented team than a lot of other teams in the West. I do think they have enough star power to beat out, and this is going to be controversial. I'm not a big Utah Jazz guy. I think the Suns, albeit they have looked good in the season's early going, I see them as a bit of a glass cannon. Now, obviously, Carmelo in that last year did start to accept his role as a bench player because he needs to accept his role as a bench player at this point in his career, because you're not throwing him out as one of your starting five if you're the Blazers, bringing him in this way. I'm curious to see what kind of game shape he's in. Because the last time we saw Carmelo, he kind of looked like he was starting to get a little bit bigger. Am I wrong for saying that?
No, I think you're exactly right. And so going back to your point about him coming off the bench, though, is at least in Houston, he had some guys that he really respected back when he was playing there, right? He had Chris Paul, James Harden, some of those guys. Whereas with the Blazers, does Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum demand as much respect as a Chris Paul and a James Harden? And to add to your point, Carmelo also looks a little bit chubby, right? So I think you might get this situation where he still thinks, no, maybe I can make this starting five, and then he's now out of shape as well.
I feel like the Blazers are one of those teams that really depends on moving the ball around, and to have someone that's such a ball stopper like Carmelo, at age, what is he, 38 right now? How much is he really going to change as a player? You're bringing in a poor defensive performance. He's not going to be able, especially now, again, we said he has started back on the pounds a little bit. He's a little older. He's not going to be able to keep up with these young, fast guys that are all over the league right now. And we talk all the time about the NFL athlete getting better. same goes for the NBA. A lot of these guys that have come out in the recent drafts are just physical anomalies, like some of the workout plans that they put out for them. Even just a player from 10 years ago like Carmelo just looks like a dinosaur nowadays.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think that's the thing is Portland was always sort of that offensive team, right? Like they can go out and score really well, especially with those guards that they have. And so now you added another primarily offensive player, and Carmelo's defense is pretty poor. But that's the thing. Are they going to be able to outshoot the rest of the West? And that's where I sort of struggle a little bit is, I think the West has gotten so much stronger that, yes, they'll still be good offensively, but so are a lot of other teams that are much better than them on the defensive perspective. And that's why I just don't know if it really does much for this team. I mean, I guess it's a low risk signing, sort of like we were saying, like risk reward ratios in our last conversation. I think it brings in some money. I think like you're not in a much worse situation than you are right now. But at the same time, like you're not in that big of, a reward situation for it either.
I mean, but aren't you? Because there's some speculation. Is Carmelo really a bad guy? Does he cause drama for a locker room? Well, the Rockets were pretty bad up until they decided to cut bait with him. And then after he was gone, it just seemed like the team was just rejuvenated and started to compete again. The Thunder just looked like a complete mess that entire time he was there. I mean, granted, I think Russ is part of that, and we've seen some of that carry over to Houston as well. But do you think, like, just, again, adding that one weird piece to the stew could cause a little bit of an issue? I mean, chemistry is a big thing, and I think it is especially a bigger thing on a smaller roster like an NBA team.
No, you're definitely right. Is because that one voice in the locker room, right, only has to go to 14 other people, or rather than 52 other people, or some of the other roster sizes, right? And so I think you're exactly right. Is that this could cause something a little bit weird chemistry wise, and we've seen that Carmelo has bounced around different teams, and some people have said, oh, he's not the best locker room guy, or hey, even Team USA didn't want him around the young guys this year, and we saw how bad this year's Team USA team was, right? So the fact that even they weren't willing to bring in Carmelo. So I don't know. It's kind of an interesting signing, I think, for the Blazers. Like I said, to me, I personally think it's just a money grab.
Is he going to be on this roster by the end of the year? Because he didn't make even like 20 games with the Rockets.
Yeah, I personally think if he behaves well, right? Like if he is that good team guy, and even if he just accepts his role and says, "Hey, I'm coming off the bench. I'm going to be a good team player," I would say, yeah. Like I don't see there's a whole lot of reason to cut him, especially if the Blazers continue to do this poorly. Like, what good is it cutting him to try to make the 8th seed in the West?
My thing about it is I think back to our first discussion about Carmelo. And I said it. I didn't want his career to turn into Vince Carter's career, where he has like 20 jerseys from random teams. He's just bounced around. And we just remember, do you remember that one weird year that Carmelo played in OKC or Portland or Houston or who knows next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like now we're at that point, and I think although he's still a Hall of Famer, we're going to remember just a weird era in Carmelo Anthony's career, and that's basically this last 3-4 years.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And it sucks for the people that grew up with Carmelo, right? Is that like, oh, Melo really was a good player when he was playing for Syracuse, and then when he first got into the league. And I remember all like the commercials that they used to have with Carmelo Anthony, right? And I remember there is one with like a magic ball. I don't know if you remember this. It was like one of those people that looks at the magic ball, right? Like this old lady, and they're talking about the game, and like one of the questions was, oh, did they win the game? And she's like, of course, it's Melo, right? And so that's how I want to remember Carmelo, not like, oh yeah, he bounced around a million teams and nobody liked him and said he was bad in the locker room.
We talked about it last week with Dwight Howard. Remember, like, do you even remember Dwight Howard's time with the Magic? No. You remember this last 10 years of 20,000 jersey combinations for him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember Denver Melo. Like, it just seems like such a far cry from what I've seen. A fading memory, especially for our millennial culture, where it's just like, we're just on to the next thing, like day after day, not even a week. It's weird doing a once a week podcast when we consider all the things that happen in a given day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And now what I will say, though, is Dwight Howard, I think he's done an exceptional job on the Lakers. I was incredibly worried about it. I was very pessimistic, and I was like, it didn't work out the first time, and everybody knows that LA is a Kobe town, right? Even though you got Kawhi Leonard there now, you got LeBron James, Anthony Davis, all these guys, but everybody knows, like, it's a Kobe town, and Kobe didn't get along with Dwight. I thought for sure that it was going to go worse than it has so far. Now, granted, it's still a long season, and we don't know what Dwight Howard might do towards the middle of the season and end of the season. But so far, I thought he's been fantastic. And I think that's the exact sort of blueprint for Carmelo Anthony is be like Dwight Howard. Just come in, say, hey, I know my role. I'm comfortable coming off the bench. JaVale McGee is still starting over Dwight Howard, even though Dwight Howard is probably the better player right now. And Dwight Howard hasn't complained too much, and we haven't heard too much come out of that locker room. And I think that's exactly what Carmelo would have to do.
I feel like Dwight, though, is still a better player at this point in his career than Carmelo is. Again, you got to remember the last time we saw Carmelo on the court, he went 1 for 13. If offense is your best thing, your best attribute.
Yeah. And you're less than 10%, that's pretty bad. You're exactly right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, at least, with Dwight, you can count on the rebounds. You could count on the energy he brings to the defensive end. I just don't know if that is still there with Carmelo, whether he could energize this team when you have to take CJ or Dame off the court. I think, if anything, it's just going to slow down that Trailblazers offense and might even make it worse.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Maybe it can add a different dynamic for your bench unit, right? When you are resting, like you said, that the two guards that they have up there. But I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic. I still think that he'll probably be on the roster come the end of the season, back to your question earlier, but I don't think he results in a lot of wins for him.
Well, hey, Vegas agrees with me. NBA odds before the Melo signing for the Blazers, 50-1. Championship odds for the Blazers after Melo signing, 50-1. So
exact same odds.
Exactly. Good for him. Get that bag.